Welcome to the Week 6 Top 150 Rankings Show. Today, we're going to cover all the biggest changes we've made to our rankings. Be sure to stay tuned to the end as we'll take your listener questions and we'll each give 2 moves to make this week. It's not good for Justin Jefferson. In fact, I would call it quite bad. I mean, possibly really bad because not only is Justin Jefferson on IR, which means he's going to miss 4 weeks, the speculation from everybody, it seems like, local reporters, national reporters, everyone, is that Justin Jefferson could very well miss more time beyond that. Perhaps because his hamstring injury is so severe, or perhaps because this team will be tanking. And so I think it's hard to say that the Vikings can get like a number 1 or number 2 pick to get one of these quarterbacks like Caleb Williams or Drake May or whatever they want to do. I don't think they're going to be that bad to do it. But obviously, Justin Jefferson gives them way more win probability in each game. So that's part of it. The other part of it is by the time Justin Jefferson is ready, if that's in 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks, Kirk Cousins could be gone. I mean, Kirk Cousins has a no trade clause, but maybe he wants to go play for Atlanta. Maybe he wants to go play for the Jets. And I think both of those teams would do really, really well to get Kirk Cousins into the mix. If Kirk Cousins is gone, they're down to like Jaron Hall or some dustball at quarterback for Justin Jefferson. The final thing I would say is that the Vikings bye isn't until very late in the season. Even after Justin Jefferson comes back, assuming he does come back, then you're going to have to deal with the bye week after that. And so we have Justin Jefferson now down to 31 overall. If you wanted to make a case that he should be lower than that, I would probably listen to you. It's just he has 2 home games in the Dome in the fantasy playoffs. And assuming Kirk Cousins is there, like, he will be one of our top projected players on those 2 slates. It's just so valuable. So, Mark, when you talk to people, if they have Justin Jefferson, we're thinking about trading for Justin Jefferson, how you would handle all the Justin Jefferson stuff right now.
Yeah, I think it's really hard just because we don't know if he's going to come back from IR after the 4 weeks. So right now there's 7 games between now and the Vikings bye in week 13. So if he misses 4, he could come back and play 3 games before the bye. And they also have a matchup against Denver and Chicago in those 3 games. So that would be, pretty exciting to get him back before the bye. And in that case, like, I do think Jefferson is a decent buy candidate right now if you're a team that's sitting at 4-1 and are kind of already making plans for later in the season. On the flip side, if in those 7 games, if he misses all those 7 games and doesn't come back until after the bye in week 14, then I think it's, I don't really know how much value he would have just in those final weeks. It's certainly a little tougher, and I think we would probably lower him in the rankings. So this injury stuff is so tough just because we don't know. We're guessing on the timeline. So I would lean that he is like a decent buy if you're looking towards the playoffs, but there's a lot of potential warning signs here that the absence might extend well longer than the 4 weeks and potentially through the bye, which could really be a tough sell right now.
It's really hard for me to say I want to trade for Justin Jefferson for anybody that we have around him here in the rankings because we're going to have more injuries to my team. I'm going to have more bye week issues on my team. I can't be giving up assets to have a guy on IR for the next 7, 8 weeks or something like that. Now, like Mark said, if you think he comes back in 4 weeks, then yeah, obviously it's way more palatable. Other Minnesota stuff, Jack, I think is interesting. We are expecting KJ Osborne to slide into the position that Justin Jefferson has, but we do think the biggest beneficiaries will be Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson. We now have TJ Hawkinson up to 24th overall in the rankings. Obviously, position scarcity helps TJ Hawkinson. We also have Jordan Addison up to 59th overall on this news, up 12 spots. KJ Osborne down at 100th. We talked about KJ Osborne a ton on the waiver show. I wanted to talk more about these other guys. I think that this is pretty bad for Alexander Mattison, and we have docked Alexander Mattison in the rankings here down to 89th overall. We saw Cam Akers start to play a lot more this past week, which is concerning on its own. And without Justin Jefferson, you're way less likely to be in the red zone. I mean, you're way more likely for the wheels to come off of this team when you don't have your best player, one of the best players in the entire NFL. So we docked Alexander Mattison. I think we have him in a good range now, 89 overall. But as long as Kirk Cousins is there, volume for Hawkinson, Addison, Osborne is going to be there as well. So yeah, Jack, would you be going to try to get any of these guys? It might be kind of hard to get Hawkinson or Addison right now, but maybe you'd be able to dump Alexander Mattison. I don't know. What do you think about making moves with the Viking stuff?
Yeah, I think Hawkinson's going to be pretty expensive. I think maybe Jordan Addison would be a little bit more tolerable price wise, but I do think that there's a lot of people that are just going to get caught up in the hype. Addison's been out there a lot, but he still has just a 15% target share. That number should obviously skyrocket, but he hasn't shown like the target earning ability yet to immediately throw him into like a mid 20s target share. So that'll be interesting to watch over the next few weeks. On Madison, I'm also pretty concerned. It's not just the structural stuff around Minnesota. It's also the fact that his route rate has dropped pretty significantly. And those aren't even going to Akers. Akers is stealing carries and short yardage stuff. And then over the past 2 weeks, Madison's route participation has been 43 and 39%. Last week, they were having CJ Ham out there on long down and distance, not even to catch the ball, just to block. So, yeah, I do think that it's a pretty concerning development for Madison, both with Jefferson as well as the decreased passing share.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I'd probably rather have a lot of these wide receivers and tight ends, like the running back stuff, Madison versus Miles Sanders or Roshan Johnson or Javante. I think that's pretty even. It's if you need wide receiver or tight end help, like I'd rather have Kittle, Goddard, Tank Dell, Tutu probably than Madison at this point. So yeah, that's just something to think about. Let's go to the JT stuff, Jonathan Taylor stuff, Mark, because we saw JT come back. However, in a humiliating fashion for the Colts, Zach Moss still went out there and shredded. Now we know they want him Anthony Richardson for maybe the whole season. Like it just keeps getting worse and worse on the Anthony Richardson news. The latest report is 4 to 8 weeks. I mean, at that point, if he's out 8 weeks, why even mess with it at that point? But yeah, how would you be handling the JT and Zach Moss stuff? I think there's a lot of people out there that picked up Zach Moss and captured gold in a bottle. And now we're like, oh God, now JT is coming back to screw me. What do you think about the Colts stuff?
Yeah, and Moss then went and shredded the Titans defense, who's been, really tough against running backs this season. Taylor only played 10 snaps in his debut. Moss had 49. I'm a little curious, like what the discrepancy is going to be once JT fully gets ramped up. I'm sure obviously with this new deal, his talent over Zach Moss, that he will be the feature back, but I'm curious if it's going to be like the 90% role that we've seen given to Zach Moss early on in the season, or since Moss has been playing so well, if it's going to be more like 70 to 80% for Jonathan Taylor and then the rest to Zach Moss. I do think the Anthony Richardson being out certainly helps Jonathan Taylor's upside just with goal line carries. Passes from Gardner Minshew, I think, are more likely than Anthony Richardson. So I do think Jonathan Taylor is probably a locked in RB1, just given what we're expecting his workload to be. But I am a little curious if he has like that RB1 overall upside with Zach Moss in this backfield. Curious your guys' thoughts there, like if you expect JT to fully take over or how much Moss is going to eat in since he's been playing well.
No, I think JT will top out, in like a best case scenario around, I don't know, 75, 80% of the running back touches in an absolute best case scenario for the Colts. But that's really good in today's NFL. And I heard some people saying stuff like, oh, well, now that the Colts have paid Jonathan Taylor, they're incentivized not to run him into the ground. I don't know, man. I think when you give a running back that kind of money, you better be getting your money's worth by getting him out there for 18, 19, 20 plus touches per game. So yeah, I feel pretty good about JT eventually being pretty far ahead of Zach Moss here, even though Zach Moss has played so well. Let's keep it moving, Jack, to some of these. You know what? We better talk about DJ Moore. Silva's been killing me because I was out on DJ Moore as a late third, early fourth round pick for most of the season, which is frustrating because I have been really high on DJ Moore when he was in Carolina. Now, I want to be very clear. These big Justin Fields, DJ Moore games have come against the Broncos and the Commanders. These are going to be two of the best spots for opposing offenses all year. So I'm not sitting here ready to say that this Fields Moore stuff is going to be really sticky all year. We have DJ Moore 45th overall, Justin Fields 63rd overall. That's kind of in line where they were going in the preseason. I kind of see it as an interesting spot to sell on these guys, but it's tough to pull the trigger considering the way they're playing right now. Jack, what do you think about Bears stuff?
Yeah, I think where we have them ranked is pretty accurate, but I think that there's probably going to be people out there that are willing to pay more than that, considering DJ Moore is coming off a game where he had 230 yards and 3 touchdowns. So we have him 45th, as you said. If someone is willing to pay, a third round price tag, I think that's when you start to sell. The target share has been outstanding over the past few weeks. He opened the year with a 5% target share. Since then, at least 24 in each game, and then 34.5% target share last week. Obviously, the efficiency is going to come down. The touchdowns are not going to be there as frequently as they have been, but I do think he's in line for a pretty voluminous role on a target share basis. It's just the Bears don't throw much, and when they throw and they're not playing the Broncos and Commanders, we probably can't expect them to be that efficient. But I don't mind him in general as a volume play, but I do think that there's probably some people out there who see, who are buying into the Fields hype and the DJ Moore hype and are willing to pay too much for him.
Yeah, I mean, I'd definitely rather have Waddle than DJ Moore, but this tier of wide receivers that we have right here beyond Waddle and DJ Moore, like Pittman, Garrett Wilson, T. Higgins, I think those guys are all pretty flat in there. It's this next tier that if somebody would give you Chris Olave, DK Metcalf, Mike Evans, Puka Nacua, something like that, Devontae Smith, for DJ Moore, that's the one that I would definitely be pulling the trigger on. Let's go to some of these running backs. So like Alvin Kamara's role has been awesome. DeAndre Swift's role has been awesome. Dave Montgomery's role has been awesome. And for the first time all season, Breece Hall's role has been awesome. So we have pretty big bumps on all these guys. I think the biggest bump is on Breece here, who we have, up 16 spots to 40th overall. That is a lot, but I think it's warranted considering we finally saw them do the right thing and put Dalvin Cook on ice. Dalvin Cook only played 10 snaps in that game. Now, Michael Carter is still playing too much, and Breece Hall is not going to get to play the Broncos every week. Zach Wilson's going to have even worse games than he's had. But at least the usage now for Breece Hall is in line with a lot of these other feature backs that we have him around, such as Joe Mixon, Raheem Mostert, Kyron Williams, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know, Mark, if I held Breece for this long, I don't think I'm selling now. I mean, this is what we've been waiting for, right? But he is coming off of the Denver game. What do you think about the Breece stuff and any other of those running backs that I mentioned?
Yeah, this has been what we are waiting for in terms of the workload. 22 carries was a career high for Breece. So obviously that's exciting. But against Denver, I was actually a little lower on Breece, like in the initial rankings, and was told, had some feedback that we were a little too low on Breece. And I think he's still a bit more matchup dependent than some of the running backs around him, just because the Jets are still running the fewest plays per game in the NFL. In games that he's not playing Denver and ripping off chunk runs and long touchdowns. Like I think the efficiency is going to be tough to come by. They just lost Elijah Vera Tucker, arguably, their most versatile offensive lineman. So I am a little bit worried that, after these big games, like people are so hyped on Breece, oh, he's back, the workload's there, it's going to continue. I think the pendulum's going to swing back a bit the other way as we move forward. So, I think Breece is probably an RB1 in good matchups and then like a mid-range RB2 in bad ones. So he's the one I'm like a little bit least confident about, just again with the offensive environment. I'm with you that I don't think Zach Wilson, is really that great. So I'm a little skeptical on him, but the other backs around him have been great.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that the thing is you can poke holes in like all these guys. I mean, I have major worries about Saquon Barkley, like major worries. He has a high ankle sprain and their team is falling apart. They have no offensive line. Daniel Jones is hurt. Like I have major Saquon Barkley concerns. We have Breece and Saquon like very close. I have Joe Mixon concerns. We'll get to the Bengals in a second here, but like Joe Mixon has had some awesome setups and not been able to do it many, many times over the last couple years. So yeah, I think Breece in that range there certainly makes sense. Guys I'd rather have than Breece certainly include DeAndre Swift, who is up 16 spots in the rankings to 36 overall. Dave Montgomery, who, I've been on for 3-4 months now. He's up to 37th overall. The Jahmyr Gibbs stuff, like, why would you, if you're the Lions, reduce Dave Montgomery's role? I mean, they're just winning and they're playing so well, and Dave Montgomery's playing so well. There's absolutely no reason to reduce that. So, yeah, I think all these moves on Kamara up 10 spots, Swift up 16, Dave Montgomery up 16 make a lot of sense. I'd be trying to get my hands on these guys if you can. It's going to be hard. The Kamara thing, though, I think, Jack, is the one interesting one. Will Jamal Williams when he comes back affect Alvin Kamara? And I think Kendrick Miller's played reasonably. A lot of it was garbage time this past week. Still, really good role for Kamara. What do you think about when Jamal Williams comes back? Is that a reason to be bearish or selling on Alvin Kamara?
I mean, I think Jamal Williams is going to take more than Kendrick Miller is right now, but I still think Kamara's going to have a big role. He's had very solid target share since he's been back, especially that first game. And we saw last year that they're willing to give him, 15 touches a game or 15 carries a game. So I think that in combination with the catching work that he's going to get keeps him as a pretty solid asset. The one thing I'm going to be looking for when Jamal comes back is who's in on the goal line. I think it's less about how many total touches Jamal Williams gets per game and more about where he gets those touches. If it's like they get inside the 5 and all of a sudden they take Kamara out and they put in Jamal Williams, that's a reason to be concerned. I don't think they'll do that, but it's something to watch for once Williams is back.
You left out one thing about Jamal Williams, and that is that he sucks. And so my take is that when Jamal Williams returns, it won't be that big a deal because he's just not good enough, right? And yeah, he might take some empty carries like 1st and 10 from your own 20 or something like that. More routes for Kamara is a good thing for fantasy, So if he's not getting that, but he's running a route instead, I prefer that anyways. All right, Mark, let's go to the Bengals stuff. This stuff is obviously really hard. My biggest regret of last week was double counting. In other words, in our projections, we had Joe Burrow docked for injury. We had docks on him for the way that they've played and fallen apart this year. And still, even with those docks, which, I think are a lot opinion-based, I always make fun of the tape bros or whatever, but people are just sitting there saying, "Oh, see, Joe Burrow can't push off with his left anterior." I don't want to hear that stuff. Now it was very clear that Joe Burrow is not playing his best. You don't know when he can turn it around. My biggest regret was double counting. We had all the docs on, and Jamar Chase was still our best wide receiver play on the entire slate, right? And that's where I was really frustrated with myself. In terms of the season-long stuff, Mark, I mean, I always think these guys figure it out. If they can play through it, they tend to figure it out. I know maybe that goes against what I said about Gabe Davis coming into this year, where Gabe Davis never figured it out last year. He was hurt from literally week 2, high ankle sprain through the entire season. I just think at the quarterback position, it's easier to figure it out, even if you are dealing with an injury. So I don't know. I'm not ready to say Joe Burrow's all the way back, and this offense is all the way back because they shredded Jamar Chase went nuclear on the Cardinals, but it was certainly a spot in the right direction. Anyways, Mark, we don't have to worry about last week. This is a forward-thinking show. What do you think about Bengals stuff going forward?
Yeah, I mean, my biggest hesitancy there was just with Burrow's health. I obviously think Joe Burrow is an amazing quarterback and can be great in fantasy when healthy. And I was just really reading into the calf injury and not being able to move around in the pocket and push off. And when they started the second half and he took that deep shot to Jamar Chase, that's when I was my throat went down to my stomach and I was like, oh man, I was way wrong because Burrow, he looked a lot healthier. He was moving around. He had some rushing yards. We took his rushing under prop, which won miraculously, but he scrambled a few times and they have a game against Seattle this week and then they go into their bye. So I'm definitely much more excited, about the outlook moving forward, just with, Burrow. I would expect he'll be pretty much close to 100% after the bye. And so that alleviates, all concerns for the most part for me, especially with Jamar Chase. In hindsight, it obviously makes more sense too, but he had some commentary after the game in week 4 where he was saying I'm always open, I'm always effing open, get me the ball. And the Bengals really leaned into that. So, again, I do think take it with a little bit of grain of salt against the Cardinals. Joe Burrow, it wasn't like he was amazingly efficient. He was still under 7 yards per attempt, just had a ton of attempts in that game. So, but I mean, yeah, I think for the most part, my offensive environment concerns are fixed here. And I apologize for the 1 week blip there.
All right. Last thing before we get to some of your questions, and we will end with the moves to make, of course, is the Miami stuff. So we found out today that Devon Achane is not just going to miss 2 or 3 weeks. He's going to miss at least 4 weeks because he ended up on IR with this knee thing. not great, obviously. Jeff Wilson might be back this week. We have 3 Dolphins running backs now in the top 96 of the rankings. Mostert, 53 overall, Achane, 68 overall. Hopefully now you can use your IR spot on him, which makes a big difference. There's a ton of people, actually. I'm in a couple Yahoo leagues. They don't even use their IR spot, which do something, like put Keaton Mitchell in there, or I don't even know if Keaton Mitchell's on IR anymore, but put someone in there and figure it out. Jeff Wilson was someone that you could have had on IR, but expecting him to be activated very soon. So yeah, Jack, I'm not sure there's like actionable moves here. Like on the Achane stuff, if you have a bad record, maybe you could trade him and sell people on the IR spot. But yeah, and also Waddle continues to tilt people. Like Waddle had very close to a very big game against the Giants. Actually saw more targets than Tyreek Hill in that game did Jalen Waddle. But yeah, what do you think about Achane, Mostert, Waddle, any other Dolphins stuff, Jack?
Yeah, I think if you have a good record, then I'd be going out and looking to acquire Achane. Mike McDaniel said today it was not a black and white obvious decision to put Achane on IR. So I think that indicates that in 4 weeks he will be good to go. And he's obviously been so incredible through the first month of the season. For Mostert versus Jeff Wilson, if Wilson plays this week, I don't think he'll immediately be thrust into the role he was last year. Salvin Ahmed's been hurt too, so maybe him and Jeff Wilson kind of share that RB2 role. But there will probably be reports leading into Sunday so that we have a better idea of what to expect. But once Wilson is more up to speed, I think a split similar to what we saw last year makes sense, where it was close to 50-50 and Jeff Wilson was even ahead at times. We saw Mostert open the season as the pretty clear RB1 here, and then Achane overtook him over the past 2 weeks. So I would not surprise me to see them ride Mostert for a week or two here while Jeff Wilson gets back up to speed, and then go to a 50-50 committee again, or like 55% Jeff Wilson.
I'm sticking with my buy Jalen Waddle take. It's not going to be my official move to make. I've probably said it 10 times and obviously has not paid off in a big way yet. He did have his second touchdown called back by penalty this past week, did Jalen Waddle. And then also, I believe, the only tweet out, I believe he had like the most expected fantasy points among all wide receivers this week, did Jalen Waddle. So yeah, I still think it's coming for Jalen Waddle. Okay, let's get to some of your questions. Appreciate everyone who sent in questions via the Twitter machine. Got a bunch of questions about JSN, Jackson Smith and Jigba. Jib says, what's the outlook on JSN for the rest of the season? Looking for a role change out of the bye week, or is he just a stash for potential injury at this point? And MLB PMAL said, better bench stash rest of season, Mims or JSN. So I believe the Seahawks now are down to 25th in 3 wide receiver sets on the season. That's obviously awful for JSN, because even when he gets out there in the 3 wide receiver sets that they do run, Lockett and Metcalf are going to be awesome target earners, and they're still going to try to establish it some with Kenneth Walker. So it's just, I have a hard time starting him right now, and his ADOT is so low. I just don't want to drop him, because if something were to happen to Metcalf or Lockett, I really think JSN would go off. So I really don't want to drop JSN. I prefer JSN to Mims. We have no signs that the Broncos staff is ready to do anything with Mims. At least JSN is out there for 3 wide receiver sets. Mims still isn't. So I think JSN over Mims. But yeah, that's my take. Mark, any JSN takes here for the people?
Yeah, I'd have JSN over Mims in that comparison. And while I would like to see his role grow out of the bye, I'm not necessarily expecting it, just because Seattle has been so effective with their 2 and 3 tight end sets, and now all 3 tight ends are healthy. So I think he'll still continue to be the slot guy, and we're mostly holding him and potentially waiting for an injury in front of him. But at this point, I think he's a pure stash, and if his role improves, that's awesome. But at this point, I'm hesitant to expect that.
Okay. G. Belechi 9 says, what would you pay roughly to trade for Achane? He's a first place team looking to add him for the stretch run. This is exactly what you just mentioned, Jack. If you are a first place team and you're trying to build a super team for the stretch run, Devon Achane could certainly be a very big part of that. I mean, some of the guys that we have around Achane include Jahmyr Gibbs, Jerome Ford, Aaron Jones, Trevor Lawrence, Pacheco, Dameon Pierce. I think those are all reasonable ideas. If Achane hadn't gotten hurt in that game, we'd probably have him, I don't know, Mark, what do you think, in the top 40,
Probably
top 30?
Yeah, top 40 and like top 12 to 13 running backs, I think.
So if you extrapolate that out to say, hey, I can afford to put Devon Achane in my IR spot for the next 4 weeks and get him back, he would be, when he comes back in our rest of season top 150, he'll likely be a top 40 player for us. And so there's certainly some edge there. But yeah, anybody that you would be looking to give up to get Achane here, Jack?
Yeah, I think if you're in first place, I would be willing to trade all of these guys for HN. I think especially if you're like 5-0 and you need 3 more wins in the next 8 weeks to go to the playoffs. I think that optimizing for the playoffs makes a lot of sense. So Aaron Jones, Jerome Ford, Pierce, I'll be willing to trade. Gibbs and Pacheco. I like a little bit more from a late season perspective. But yeah, I think that trading for HN if you're in first place is pretty sharp.
I mean, alpha move. You're 5-0. Trade for Justin Jefferson and Devon Achane, right? And just like try to figure it out and hope you make the playoffs. Then you would have your loaded team plus Jefferson and Achane. I mean, yeah, there could be some teams that are really desperate for both those guys. I think that's interesting. BTR says sell or buy on Chris Olave. Derek Carr's shoulder seems to be affecting Olave's output. We have Derek Carr's shoulder. We have Chris Olave seemingly with some type of foot or toe issue that he played through this past week. We also have Michael Thomas playing at a really high level and earning targets. We also have Alvin Kamara earning a ton of targets. So yeah, it's not great for Chris Olave now. Despite all that, though, outside of this one blip he had this past week, he's still been very good. We did drop him 11 spots in the rankings down to 28th. Overall, Mark, would you be selling right now on Chris Olave?
I think I'd more so be buying just because, the talent is there. We've seen just his yards per route run as a rookie and then continuing into the second year have been pretty elite. And while there is competition, on that roster for touches, like I do think at the end of the day, Olave is going to come out on top. I think it's fair to kind of drop him from that, first, second round range into now like the middle of the third round, because I do think just without the volume being locked in there, that there are going to be some more spike weeks and some more down weeks than maybe consistency. But I mean, Olave is such a baller, and now is going to be the worst time for Derek Carr, right? The first few games after playing through this injury and against New England's, gave zero resistance at all to putting points up on the board. So I think, I'd lean more so buying Olave at this point.
Breaking news into the show. Jahmyr Gibbs not practicing still today due to a hamstring injury. So sounds like it was not a minor day-to-day type thing on Jahmyr Gibbs. Whatever he did in practice last Friday, still keeping him out of practice, meshes with the Montgomery ranking move that we made. Keep moving here from T. Roy Biv. He says, thoughts on Sam Laporta versus TJ Hawkinson rest of season. I'd argue Laporta looks like the better player, but he seems to have more weapons around him. So we don't have this one particularly close. Mark, we have Laporta way back behind Hawkinson. And I think people are going to say maybe we have Laporta too low, and I can get on board with that. I can't get on board with saying that Hawkinson and Laporta are in the same tier. I mean, Hawkinson without Justin Jefferson, he might see 9 or 10 targets a game. I mean, because this team throws so much. They're so throw happy. They have so much trust in TJ Hawkinson. I'm not saying it's going to be a valuable 10 targets. Their ADOT's going to be low, but yeah, I think that's not close between those guys. But yeah, I don't know, Jack. How close would you have Laporta and Hawkinson here? Right now, we have it 70th overall for Laporta, and we have Hawkinson up at 24th overall.
Yeah, I think there is an argument to have Laporta a little bit higher, but I agree with you that he's not really in the same vicinity as Hawkinson. For me, Hawkinson's target share without Justin Jefferson should be like low to mid 20s. And like you said, they're one of the pass happiest offenses in the league, and they have to be that way because they have to score points to win because their defense isn't very good. So yeah, I think it's wheels up for Hawkinson as long as JJ is out, and even once JJ is back, he's a tier ahead of Laporta for me.
Sure. And like if Gibbs continues to be out, if Amon-Ra's, whatever he has going on, continues to be out, Laporta should be way, way, way higher. I do think that Amon-Ra has a pretty good chance to be back this week. Seems somewhat unlikely now on Gibbs. I think the larger point, though, Mark, is that at the tight end position, there's only like 5 guys maybe you'd feel good about starting each week. We have Laporta as the 4th one, obviously behind Kelsey, Hawkinson, Andrews. Goddard just had the breakout game, but I always felt pretty okay about Goddard. Beyond that, you can take an air ball from Kittle. You can take an air ball from Waller. You can take an air ball from Ingram. We know you can take an air ball from Kyle Pitts. So yeah, it's just Laporta's ability to actually be someone I can count on to get me points each week at the tight end position. There's some level of value there, if you know what I mean. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I think personally, I'd probably have Laporta a little bit higher for position scarcity stuff, but I don't want people to get out of control on Laporta just because, his outlook looked so great without Gibbs and Amon-Ra. So yeah, any more thoughts
Right.
on Laporta stuff?
Yeah, I mean, he does look great at the tight end position, but it's just been so bad overall that I think people are getting a little bit out over their skis in terms of overall value. Like if we moved him up, into the top 50, then he'd be above guys like Zay Flowers and I don't know, like mid-range wide receiver twos that I wouldn't trade Laporta for. So that's like when doing the rankings, it's kind of trying to slot guys. Okay, would I trade this person straight up for the other guy? So certainly, Laporta looks great, but I do think it has been kind of like a career best start early on. So he's still capable of throwing up duds. We haven't necessarily seen it yet, but like again, like I think he deserves to be the tight end for sure after Kelsey, Hawkinson, Andrews. If you want to move him up overall on the list, like I think that's totally fine. And we can look at it more after too. But in terms of like in the tight end ranking specifically, I think he's pretty locked in at tight end 4.
Yep, agreed. Tom has an interesting question on Kyren Williams. He says, Kyren Williams rest of season outlook. He's been living on TD's receiving work while being inefficient. Cooper Kupp returning scares me. Should I trade him straight up for Calvin Ridley? That's an interesting trade. I think people got too low on Calvin Ridley. Then they're, probably got too high on Calvin Ridley. There's somewhere in the middle on Calvin Ridley that I think is right, where he's not just like a stone cold alpha, but he's a very, 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 very good asset. Kyren Williams to me is also an awesome asset. Now, he was not going to have a good game against the Eagles, the way they defend the run, Cooper Kupp coming back, all that stuff certainly matters. I think in other scenarios, we'll probably see more run-heavy scripts out of the Rams. I believe they play the Cardinals this week. Certainly a good place to start. But yeah, what do you think about that one, Jack? Would you trade Kyren Williams for Calvin Ridley?
Yeah, I think I would definitely prefer Ridley there. He still has a good target share on the season, although before last week it was rough for a couple weeks. And the Jaguars are one of the better passing offenses in the league. So I think Ridley's going to be a strong asset all year long. I think there's going to be some volatility there as we've seen, but from a long-term perspective, I'm not really that worried. And then on Kyren Williams, with the inefficiency we've seen so far, he ranks near the bottom of the league in rush yards over expectation, under 4 yards per attempt. And then last week, this was, potentially game script or opponent base, but they had in their first game with cutback, they had their highest single game neutral game script pass rate of the year. So I think they're going to tilt a little bit more pass heavy moving forward, and combine that with Kyron's inefficiency so far, and I prefer Ridley.
Yeah, I certainly prefer Ridley too. I do want to say on this stuff, like I'm almost always going to prefer wide receiver, even if it's close. And I don't think that one's like all that close, but when it's close, I'm always going to prefer wide receiver. The problem with that is that on my teams, I don't really have very many running backs. Like if I hit on Kyren, I can't really afford to trade him. And again, there's going to be so much churn at the running back position. Just be careful with your running back room. Even if we have Calvin Ridley a round or two ahead of some running back, like there's going to be running back stuff that happens to your room there. You want to be sure that you can sustain it. Last question we want to do here, Mark, is from PDX Heater. He says, what should I do with Javonte Williams? He was dropped in one of my leagues, so I picked him up, but not sure it's going to pay off. He may never be that guy. Look, man, coming back from multi-ligament knee injuries is going to be hard. I'm not ready to say he may never be that guy, but it's different than what happened to Brees, where Brees's ACL tear was much, much cleaner than Javonte Williams. Also, I think they really like Jaleel McLaughlin. Like, even when Javante's back, and I do expect him back this week, I think we're going to see early game situation, not garbage time, early neutral situation game carries, touches for Jaleel McLaughlin. And obviously that's not great for Javonte or Samaje Perine. We have Javonte 91st overall. If you picked him up off waivers, Mark, which I'm not shocked that people were able to do that, but if you're able to pick him up off waivers, how would you be handling that one?
Yeah, I mean, I would pick him up in that scenario. I don't think I'd really play him this week against the Chiefs. I do think it'll be a three-way running back by committee, and the Broncos right now are running the second fewest plays in the league ahead of only the Jets. So there's not like a whole lot of opportunity to go around for those three running backs. So it's certainly tough. Javonte was one of my biggest fades this year, just coming off that multi-ligament injury, and I was high on Samaje Perine, and now here comes Jaleel McLaughlin out of nowhere to eat in. So it's tough. I think he's fine to stash on benches, but I agree it's kind of hard to envision a great upside path here, just with how the Broncos look as a team and the three-way running back committee. But I think he's worth holding still for a little bit longer.
Yeah, agreed. I would hold on Javonte Williams as long as you can see what happens there in that backfield. All right. Let's get to our moves to make. I have a bunch here, so I'm going to let you guys go first in case you take any of mine. I have a lot of moves that I want to be making this week. Mark, I'll let you go first here, then we'll go to Jack, and then I will give my first one. So, Mark, you're up here. Move to make ahead of week 6.
I'll start with sell Saquon Barkley. And it might be confusing because Saquon is back at practice. Looks like he has a good chance to play this weekend. But Saquon's coming off a high ankle sprain, and we've seen that sap his explosiveness in the past and just other running backs around the league. The offensive environment for the Giants just looks brutal at this point. Horrible offensive line. Daniel Jones banged up, might be starting Tyrod Taylor. I just don't see like Saquon becoming an RB1 this season. Mike Clay also released his, rest of the season strength of schedule rankings, and the Giants have the 30th ranked, strength of schedule against running backs. They play New Orleans and Philadelphia in the fantasy playoffs, who have been two of the best 3 teams against fantasy running backs so far. So I think if anyone is willing to buy Saquon as an RB1 or low end RB2, I'm making that sale right now and kind of cutting my losses and moving on.
Agreed. And I gave my Saquon take totally agree with that one. Jack, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with buy Zay Flowers for my first move to make. His volume has been incredible all season. He had a 45% target share in his first career game, but he was basically a gadget player going on there, giving him carries. And then he had a 2.6 average depth of target in week 1, 3.5 in week 3. He had a 12.6 ADOT in week 2, but pretty much all of that was on a 52-yarder. But so for the first 3 weeks of the season, they really weren't giving him real routes. It was just getting him targets near the line of scrimmage. But in week 4, he had a 13.3 ADOT. And then in week 5, it was 16.7. He had 10 targets that week for a 28.9% target share. So he's running real routes right now, and he's maintaining the same target share he had before. He was very close to an even bigger fantasy day than he had. He had a drop on like a 20-yard play early in the game, and then the very next play or the play after that, Lamar was under pressure and missed him for what would have been a big gain. He hasn't scored a touchdown yet. He hasn't topped, I think, 76 yards. So I think that a real breakout game for Zay Flowers is coming within the next couple of weeks, given that he's now getting real NFL wide receiver targets, and he's still getting a mid to high 20s target share. And there's so much evidence that rookie wide receivers improve throughout the season. So I'd be looking to invest in Zay Flowers right now.
I like that one for sure. And it's over for Odell. It may never happen for Rashad Bateman, and all that stuff certainly flows through and helps Zay Flowers as well. We got a question here from where is the question? Oh, we got a question from Kenny Canick about CeeDee Lamb. Rest of season outlook on CeeDee Lamb. Dak looks atrocious. Great matchup this week, but should I look to move him? It's ironic you ask that because my first move to make is indeed buy CeeDee Lamb. We've seen some squeaky wheel stuff, man. Jamar Chase squeaky wheel stuff. AJ Brown squeaky wheel stuff. CeeDee Lamb was out there bitching this week, complaining. Hard to blame him. Had an awful start to the season. The next set of games for the Cowboys, and believe me, they've played the Jets, one of the most difficult wide receiver matchups. They played the Patriots, which is, whatever, not great. Played the 49ers, which is difficult. And even in the games that they've won, they weren't even close. CeeDee Lamb never had a chance. I mean, they blew out the Giants 40-0. They blew out the Patriots 38-3. So when your next games are against Chargers, Rams, Eagles, Giants, Panthers, Commanders, Seahawks, Eagles, that's the time to get it going. So I am not panicked on Dak. I am not panicked on Tony Pollard, who I like as a buy. And I am not panicked on CeeDee Lamb, who we have 14th overall, and I like as a buy as well. I'm sure there's some people with CeeDee Lamb right now that are likely 1 and 4 or something like that. You can probably offer them someone way lower on our list. I mean, they got to be mega tilted right now. You could probably, I don't know, like Mike Evans for CeeDee Lamb. Maybe that works. I don't know. You got to feel out your league, but yeah. Saquon Barkley for CeeDee Lamb, something like that. All right. Let's go back to Mark for his second and final move to make.
Yeah, this one I think it's solid ahead of week 6, but I also kind of like this move just in general for the next couple weeks, and that's by Jerry Jeudy. Jeudy set a season high in snaps, routes, and targets in week 5. He's presumably fully healthy after suffering that preseason hamstring injury. We've seen this Denver defense just be historically bad and allow a ton of points. And I think most people will look at the Broncos and just be like, oh, the whole team is horrible. But it's really just been the defense has been historically bad. And the offense has actually performed pretty well. I mentioned they are second to last in the NFL in plays per game, but I think that's going to regress positively a little bit. And I do think Jerry Jeudy is still, the wide receiver 1 in this offense. So he hasn't had a single game as a wide receiver 2 or higher. I think people are valuing him more in like the wide receiver 4 flex range. And I think he should be a locked in wide receiver 3 moving forward. So I think now is a good time to buy low on Jerry Jeudy. This game on Thursday night against Kansas City is looking to be rainy and windy. So I'm a little hesitant to say like go out and buy him right now. I think the price could even get a little cheaper after this game if the weather's as bad as it looks like it might be. So store this one in your pocket maybe for early next week if Jeudy puts up another disappointing game.
Yeah, it's surprising to me that Jeudy has not had a big game yet because they get into these setups where their defense is so bad. They should be so voluminous and aggressive in the pass game, but hasn't worked out for Jerry Jeudy yet. I think that's certainly an interesting one. Jack, who is your second and final move to make?
Yeah, this is one I've personally done in a couple leagues where I have Anthony Richardson, and I'm going with Matthew Stafford here. Like I mentioned earlier, the Rams had their highest single game neutral game script pass rate of the season, which coincided with Cooper Kupp returning. I think there's a little bit of signal there, and with a really good wide receiver duo in Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, they could look to throw the ball more. But even more than that, Matthew Stafford has been pretty good this season, but he has just a 2.5% touchdown rate. So I think that he's going to start throwing touchdowns soon, and the touchdowns are going to start catching up to the rest of his stats. And so if you had Anthony Richardson or if you need a streamer, Stafford plays the Cardinals this week, and he'd be probably the top guy I'm looking at for that.
Yep. Like Matthew Stafford. I mean, Puka, Cooper Kupp, and Tutu Atwell with Higbee and Kyron, that he can get it done with that for sure. Okay. I had so many moves to make. I had buy CeeDee Lamb, which I just said. I had sell Alexander Madison, which I already talked about. I have 2 more here that I'll just quickly get off my chest for the people. Yes, an extra bonus move to make because we are givers here. My first one would be sell George Pickens. Deontay Johnson is expected back after the Steelers' week 6 bye. And I mean, that is going to suck up a ton of targets, but I'm more concerned that it changes the route tree for George Pickens because when Deontay Johnson has been healthy, George Pickens has been more of a clear out wide receiver, and Deontay Johnson's been getting the much more valuable, much more easy to catch targets. Also, Kenny Pickett could just be hashtag bad. I mean, it's been not great for Kenny Pickett. And so I think coming off these big games that George Pickens has had, the situation is about to change a lot. I like selling George Pickens for someone that we have higher in our rest of season top 150. Second one that I have might be a little controversial. Sell Amari Cooper. Now, I don't like selling guys who have already had their bye, and Amari Cooper's already had his bye. I think that makes a reasonably big difference. However, in your negotiation with your fellow dolt, your fellow colleague in your season-long league, you can explain to them, listen, you got to give me more for Amari here. They already had their bye. I am concerned about this Deshaun Watson stuff. I mean, sounded like Browns expect him to play. Sounded like they thought he could play. He was medically cleared. Doesn't play. Then they go into the bye. Then they come out of the bye. He's still not practicing. And by the way, I've only seen Deshaun Watson play one good football game in a Browns uniform, and that was against the massive pass funnel of the Tennessee Titans. We also know that the weather in Cleveland late in the year can get really, really ugly and really, really hurt guys like Amari Cooper. We saw that last year, even when Jacoby Brissett and Amari Cooper were really playing well. So I think it's an interesting time to try to dump Amari Cooper here if you can. All right. That is going to do it for this week's rest of season top 150 show. We'll continue to make tweaks on this for the rest of the afternoon. Be sure you go and check out the full list before you make any trades, do any best ball drafts, et cetera, et cetera. The best ball resurrection on Underdog, we do have specific rankings for that. Those are up on the site right now. You can upload those to Underdog, assuming you do have access to the in-season package. For Mark, for Jack, for producer Steven, for King Editor Jackson Kane, for producer Luke, for Jerry, the most beautiful beast in the world, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.